Well, anyways, it was from
They
Southern
didn't.
America.
Yeah,
We don't
whatever.
have that much time.
Yeah, I
No,
know. Don't
Latin
don't
I'm
America,
distract
that's
me
there
away
and
good.
I
from it,
don't
please.
remember the seat.
Hello.
How are we doing?
Good.
Oh, Saturday. Warm Saturday. It's actually warm
It's
here.
hot. It's hot.
Maybe over there it's hot.
It is hot. It is hot, but we're managing with water and with a fan.
There
I
you go.
can see that. And then you put your head inside of a fridge as well sometimes, right?
Ooh,
Sometimes, desperate times.
that refrigerator
I made
was
my own
good.
human fridge.
Exactly. That was cool. That was a good thinking.
Well, let's get started today. I think it's the natural next step in the series that we started on the process of aging. We talked about beauty and how our definition of beauty changes as we age. And then we talked about the wisdom that we gain as we age. And now we're going to talk about friendships because friendships do change over time. And it's important to talk about friendships because that is the counterbalance to loneliness and isolation. And those things, research has found, do increase negative health risks. Specifically, one study found that loneliness and isolation can lead to a 32% increase in heart disease and stroke. I don't know if you knew that.
Wow.
Yeah. Whereas friendships can contribute to boosting your immune system. It can also help regulate your blood pressure, which all combined can help also to boost the feelings of happiness and decrease depression. So, really looking at the friendships we have that we not just maintain, but really strengthen as we do experience these changes as we age is really important for overall health. So today we're going to be talking about our experiences with how friendships have changed over time. I'm going to give a little bit of information about the trends that we see in the
Yeah.
different decades of our life, and we'll see if it matches up to our experiences. So that's the plan for today. Sound good?
Perfect.
Sounds great.
All right. So first, let me share a little bit about the patterns that we see over time in terms of the friendships that we have. So in our 20s, we see that most people develop friendships by proximity, meaning the people that are closest to them physically around them. So this could be like in your school, you develop those friendships in work. That may be where you have most of your friends. And someone who moves in their 20s is more likely to seek out new friendships versus someone who has stayed in the same place for a while. They tend to stick to the friends they have. In your 30s, you start to experience life changes, whether that's getting married or settling down with someone or having kids. And so a lot of the friends that you have are built up around some of those shared experiences. And with that, you might even see friends that you had before that who don't have the same life changes drift away a little bit. And not in a bad way, just, we don't have as much in common. Plus, your time decreases, right? Because now you're putting attention to a relationship or to your children. And so just naturally, there's not as much time maybe for the same things you did in your 20s. And then in your 40s, you become more intentional about your relationships because you do see some significant changes, whether that's empty nest, your kids start to leave. Maybe you're taking care of aging parents. And so the demand to put your attention in certain places increases. And so you really work on the relationships you have, the friendships you have, and really have to dedicate time to continue to grow those and maintain those, right? So you become very intentional about that. And then in your 50s and beyond, you continue to go through some changes, which can include retirement. It might even include relocation in that process of retirement. And so with that comes some new challenges with maintaining the friendships that you have and potentially even as you age and maybe experience some of the physical changes like we've talked about, right? Mobility changes that could also impact your ability to physically share space with friends. But we're going to talk about some of the opportunities that also exist to maintain, even in those changes, continue to maintain and strengthen your friendships. So those are the trends. I don't know if I was talking some of that sounds familiar, but we're going to find out because we're going to now dive into our experiences. So we're going to start with looking at the friendships we had in our 20s and 30s and talking a little bit about what went into our decision making about having those folks as our friends and what was important to you at that time in a friendship. So I'm going to start with Aunt Laura.
All you said there is actually very true. You know, in this journey called life, we go through process, we go through different environments, and you know, we change, like you said, we change locations and then we change friends. However, you know, when you really get a close friend, a real friend, I will say it, you know, will stay with you always, all the time, you know, and that is my experience. Even though, you know, I got married young, I will say young, 24, and then I moved, went to work for this company, big company, and then you start meeting more people there, and of course you make friends. But bottom line, you know, I say that the real friend is the one that really it's always there for you, even through a call. And nowadays it's so easy with these messages, you know, either WhatsApp or FaceTime or whatnot, you know, to keep in touch, I would say. So for me, that's what I have experienced, and it's really a great thing that had happened to me, you know, because even though I've been in different places, I meet a lot of people, but the real ones is still with me.
Mm-hmm. So in your 20s and 30s, a lot of those friendships were built around work. And when you did have to relocate, you built new friendships.
Exactly. That's what happened, you know, at work, like you said, you know, when you're in a new work and then you start meeting people very common to your ideas, you know, you make a like a click, you know, like a link with a certain people that really, well, the same beliefs, I will say. They don't have to be the same people, you know, or you
Mm-hmm.
have to be the same, but there is something there that is always clicking common between, you know, the person and yourself. So yes, when I start working, you know, and then, you know, I start building new relationships in a different location, you know, I still building my friendship. And like you said at the beginning, you know, it's so good to keep in touch with these people because you're happier. Actually, you're happier. And mostly my, you know, at the beginning with my new journeys or my new traveling, I made it with them and I get to know them better, you know, from different countries. And you know, I was always, you know, very attached to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Happy
Which
memories as well.
Mm-hmm. Which is a great point in terms of as you built new relationships, you kept the core friends that maybe you were no longer close to physically, but that the
Mhm.
common, whether it's core beliefs or values or shared experiences, you found ways to maintain those friendships. Yeah. How
Exactly.
about for you, Mom, in your 20s and 30s?
Well, in my 20s, I was attending a college, Academy of Commerce was called, where you learn to be a secretary. Probably a different world from now. We had to learn how to do shorthand, file, type in the old typewriters. Probably some of the young people said, "What is shorthand?"
What's a typewriter?
Anyways, anyways, more than friends in that the 3 years I did, 2 or 3 years I did there were more like acquaintances. We would go out and have coffee, you know, but now in my high school, which is, you know, more or less from 16 to 18, 15 to 18 years of age, I had a very good friend that remained until I left, you know, where we lived in Guadalajara and moved to Mexico City. And I think what I looked for, you know, in what one looks maybe when you're young is someone like Laura was saying, similar likings, you know, similar ideas in life. I had a very, very good friend, a neighbor. He was a very nice, quiet person. He gave me many common sense advice. And I think one of the things when you're young, you like to also feel comfortable in a friendship, you know, that you can talk openly and honesty. Honesty is always good. Now, that was in my 20s. In my 30s, I got married and we were a military family. So we moved, you know, every so often, every couple of years or so. So the friends were kind of temporary friends. So I really, in those years, didn't make what you would call a close friend. And that was in my 30s.
Yeah. So an interesting experience for you because where Alada said she's doing a lot of traveling now and she's finding relationships, new relationships, and potentially longer lasting relationships. For us, we moved a lot. And so not that you were opposed to the idea of having friendships, it's just they were temporary. And I think you had the mindset of these aren't long-term friends, these are acquaintances, right? Until we move again in 2 or 3 years. Yeah.
I kept in touch, again, as we were talking, I think in one of our short cafecitos, I love to send, cards, of course, Christmas cards. Actually, up to very recently, that I haven't heard from them, but I would kept in touch, especially some good friends we made in Nassau, Bahamas.
What do you think it was about? Because I remember those friends. What was it about those friends that you continued even through all the moving and stuff to stay connected to them?
For many, many years, I haven't really sent a note, and I don't have their phone number to do the wonderful WhatsApp or something. But I think one of the things, we were the same culture, because one of the friends was, for example, from how do you call it? One was from Colombia, one was from what is this little country in the southern? I cannot
Panama,
believe what.
Panama, no?
No,
No, what?
Gladys was from Colombia, I think. No, Gladys was from
Gladys,
Guatemala, I believe. Jorge
Guatemala,
from Cuba. They were a
Cuba.
couple.
Mm.
Mimi was from what is next to Colombia? Dear Lord, I have to go back to my
It's
geography.
okay, but they were all from Latin America.
Latin America.
Exactly.
So we
Yeah.
had a lot of friends.
Mhm.
Aide was from, well, anyways, it was from Southern America.
Yeah,
We don't
whatever.
have that much time.
Yeah, I
No.
know. Don't
Latin
don't
America,
get
that's
Forgive me when
good.
I
for
don't
it, please.
remember the seat.
But
But we were in touch for many, many years.
yeah, well, and that's a great point. It's a good segue to me because I think, in 20s and 30s, I mentioned proximity and shared life experiences. In my 20s, for sure, and really the tail end of my early 20s was in school and then launching into work. In school, it was definitely common culture, which I think naturally built a lot of connection with values that you have, core values you have. And then in work, it was really because you're so busy. I think for me, I was so busy, and I'm an introvert naturally. And I think going back to our moving, I don't know if I didn't feel the need or I just adapted to the idea of not having really close friends. I think I've had one close friend from my youth through all those travels that I still talk to. So now it's going on 40 years, but it's very infrequent, but we still try to connect via text now. It was about proximity. It was easy to connect with people that are in your same work environment because you don't have to do a lot of extra work around that. But it was very superficial level, going out once in a while, but not much other than that occasional outing. And then most of my time was family focused. And so that was my 20s and 30s. Yeah, so for us, I think the pattern matches a little bit of the trends that we tend to see with some minor tweaks. But now let's talk about moving into our 40s and 50s. And before we get there, what I will say is, I mentioned some of the life changes we experience, but as we age, we might encounter some additional obstacles or challenges. One is retirement because we retire in different phases. So as you do that and other friends don't, right? Your time shifts, but theirs doesn't, or vice versa. And so the amount of time you can dedicate to some friendships shifts. Changes in family dynamics that I mentioned, whether that's you had children who are now becoming adults and launching, and so you have the empty nest piece. And then physical limitations we talked about earlier. So as you age, that might impact mobility and your ability to go physically out to be with friends. And then relocations. You might decide as you move into retirement to move, right? Or you might move closer to your kids as their families grow. You may decide to move closer to them. But there's also opportunities with that. As you retire, you have more leisure time, right? As your children have children, you have the opportunity to develop other kinds of relationships as like a mentor to your grandchildren, even a mentor to your children, right? As they become parents, you get to share your wisdom with them. You have the opportunity to use technology, and we've had a few conversations about technology. And it's about willingness to try new things, where we're saying the youth may not know what writing a letter is or what a typewriter is. We also have to get accustomed to, FaceTime and potentially social media and those types of things. But those become opportunities, especially if you have physical limitations, to still connect with people without having to push yourself physically, right? So, with that in mind, as we move into our 40s and 50s, we start to see some of those challenges emerge. And so I'm curious now what friendships in your 40s and 50s looked like and what you were looking for in your friendships at that point. I'll start with Aunt Lauda.
Well, first of all, the friendships that I kept, I actually, always looking for honesty and loyalty, and that's exactly what we are in common between us, because we're loyal to each other and respect, I would say, because sometimes you want to see this person so badly, but then there is not, of course there will be time if you work on your schedule, but for some reason or the other you're always busy and you don't get to see these people. But there is always the communication, like you say, the technology, or I tend here to get together physically and play cards, for instance, keep in touch, even though we don't see in weeks. We gather together, we give us a call once in a while, and let's get together, and update how we're doing. And that's something really nice, because you realize that we're the same people, right? We like the same things. And of course, life, we're in a different trend, but we still thinking as we used to. So I think it's the most important thing for a relationship as a friendship. I've been in this age, 40s and 50s. I also, like myself, that I come to a very, not religious, but very strict, not strict, but how would you say that word?
Like spiritual?
Education. Before, when I was young, it was hard for me to make a friend with a male, because if you're with a friendship on a male, you always would think, you have to be, like love friendship, I would say. And that kept me a little bit far from the male size. I did have a lot of friends, male and female, especially in my neighborhood, but we never got close to it. And I was going to say that at this age, when you're 40 and 50, you're really mature, things are so different. Then I'm starting to get this male conversation, like your mama was saying. I think you referred to your neighbor when you had this close friend, it was a male. But to me, thinking about a male, it probably would be not really an open relationship, I would say. And nowadays I am because I found myself, getting in touch with these friends, male friends that I have. And I really, feel more open and not forget about, the other sense of, getting close to the different gen. So yes, that's what I think is different from me.
And I think what you're talking about are social rules, right? I think, and we've talked a lot about what it was like growing up for us in terms of what were the cultural norms in our immediate family, our immediate social circles, right? And I mean, there were days where you couldn't go out with a male unless you were accompanied by somebody, right? You had a chaperone. And so the assumption that you have a male friend is because you are romantically involved, might have stifled the ability to have those friendships. But now, as someone, like you say, now who's just matured, but I think the passage of time also changes social rules and social norms. And so that's probably not even a thought now, right? It's just your friend, exactly, unless you announce differently that it is something more. So it's giving you the chance to have different kinds of relationships. But what I was going to say that I appreciated, I think, as you went into your 40s and 50s, it sounds like you zoned in on the importance of key values of someone who's honest with you, someone who is truthful, probably supportive, and you also had more intention about how, and you were creative about how you maintain connection. Having a game night, right, is a fun way to get together and spend time together. And probably in that process, you talk about other things, right? Versus having to plan out a major night out where you go out to dinner or go dancing or do any of those things. It's shifted a little bit, but it's still very valuable. How about for you, Mom, in your 40s and 50s? How did it shift?
First, I remember the country, Bolivia. I hate not to remember
Okay. Oh my
something like
goodness.
that. I was from Bolivia. Anyways, the 40s, we were still traveling. And I remember that we would make friends here and there, but again, was just temporary, except for these nice friends in Nassau. We were in Nassau in the 1980s, weren't we? Yeah,
Mhm.
1983 or so. And up until a few years ago, we would, send little notes talking about letters. But in my 50s, I do recall, though, in my close to my 50s, where we were still, the last 4 years of our military life was in Okinawa, Japan. And funny enough, although, well, not funny, it was nice. I made friends with, where we were working with two lovely Japanese ladies. And we had a lot in common because, their culture, like our Latin culture, is very much family oriented, respect for others, tradition. So those were my friends where I worked in Okinawa, Japan. And in my 50s, definitely, we arrived in Southern California in 1992,
Mhm.
close to my 50s. That's when finally I made a couple of friends that have lasted for the last 20 years or more. One was older and was a neighbor when we first got here in Southern California. And she was a wonderful friend, supportive, like we were saying, with, very positive, always helping others. She helped me to settle down. She was a very strong support in good and bad times that we had here. And then through her, I made friends with this other, actually, they were their family. My older friend passed away a few years ago, but the younger, we keep very close touch. Um, and I think that in your 50s, 40s and 50s, you begin to see someone you can not only relate to, but you can find a support because we begin to have more little pains and tribulations physically with age. So it's wonderful that you have someone that, I don't feel too good and I need and have that support. Of course, similar likings. And yeah, they have been very good friends for the first time in a long time. Those are my friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think again, you zone in on the idea of support. And it's funny how with the one friend who passed away a few years ago because she had her child as a neighbor to you down the line, that you've been able to use that as the connection, the bridge, and have that friendship last past the passing of your other friend. And ultimately, they somewhat, and I think Anlada said this before, they become like family when you have that level of closeness and trust and support. And even when you go through tough things together, I imagine the passing of your older friend, but then still connecting with her child and partner, right, is a sense of the larger chosen family that you have as you age, and you become more selective about those friendships, right?
Exactly.
Proximity plays a little bit into it because again, you all kind of lived in the same area, but I think it's that sense of what the core values are, the key things that are important to you in those friendships that make them last. And I think for me in my 40s right now, I think that the thing for me is again, I still stay connected to the one childhood friend I have, and we connect because of her mobility issues, we connect primarily through text, and there's no pressure to have extended conversations or have a regular time that we meet. We just send a informal inside joke or something like that, or the music we used to like. If someone that we followed in our youth has a new record, hey, did you hear the new whatever record? Just out of the blue, and it's almost like we reconnect like we did when we were 11. But as an adult and making new friendships, that's not really a thing, because I think I'm in that stage where I'm more family focused, and relatively we're close in terms of physically where we're located. And so I think it gives me the ease to connect in physical spaces when the time comes, but don't really feel the pressure to establish new relationships or friendships, because most of my value now is in enjoying family. And I think a lot of that comes from not doing that when I was younger. So that's kind of where I am now. So I think it may help people, because even though, and I hope they got this from our stories, even though we go through life changes, different phases of life, clearly we have friendships that we've preserved or found ways to maintain and strengthen. And it is possible, even though we might encounter some challenges, to even build new friendships on occasion. So I want to shift focus to how people can create pathways for connection. Because if some people listening are like, well, I don't have many friends and I want more friends, or some relationships that simulate that experience, right, of having these friends, we want to give them some tools they can use. So one is maybe just starting in places that are familiar to you that will naturally draw community. If you volunteer, there might be volunteer groups. If you have a more structured religious dedication, right? You have a church, sometimes you have community events that can become the place to socialize. And we've talked about core values, and that might be a place where you find people with similar values and interests. Also, virtual groups is an option if you have mobility issues, right? We talk about technology, and there are a lot of places and centers that do routine groups where you can connect with people. You can consider smaller interactions. So with the friends that you've had, maybe that don't live close anymore, maybe you can plan a small coffee meetup, right? Again, doesn't have to be something extravagant or that takes a lot to plan. Or texting, like I mentioned with my friend from long ago. If you were doing community things around physical activities like hiking and things like that, maybe a hiking group, maybe you can find something that is not as intense for you. They're like walking groups, gardening, and you may have to adjust to like a raised garden versus a ground level garden, but you can still maintain those things. And be realistic about your energy level too, right? Because I think that also shifts over time. And maybe in your 20s, you could do a million things and go out at midnight and stay out till 6 a.m, but that changes. And so that will redefine the ways in which you have those gatherings with your friends. And we've been saying this all along, but let your values guide your connections, right? I think as we age, we want relationships that give us, feed the meaning of things that are important to us, right? And so it's not superficial connections anymore, lots of acquaintances. It's about a handful of people that are really important to us, share a lot of the same values, core beliefs, as you said, Aunt Lauda. And so continue to look for whether it's community events, volunteering, or sometimes there's like local neighborhood things if proximity is important, but connecting with people that share the same core beliefs and values. And then, yeah, be open to new things, because sometimes we get really comfortable. I think, Mom, you said the word comfortable. I mean, I know for me, for sure, and it's an energy thing. I don't want to have to put too much out to make new friends. But I think I'm open if, I'm invited to something and I have the time and it sounds interesting, I'm open to trying it. I don't know if either of you have any additional tips to that to help people figure out how they can continue to strengthen their relationships or even create new connections.
Well, I think that is very important, like you say, somehow, even if you don't have a very close friend, to have some relation in activities that you do. Because one thing I realized, and is, said enough, as you grow older, it's important to have that some kind of social connection, like you were saying also at the beginning. And that's what I see in my friends in these later years, the two close friends now, that they're cheerful, positive, you can share ideas, you laugh because love is essential in your life, to have funny moments. And yeah, it's very important in older age to have some. You don't have to have in the middle of a bunch of friends, but the few in social activities, that according to our age, but it's important. Our social world is important.
Yeah, I would say that to have a quality friendship, a real friendship, you have to be, or you have to look for a truth teller, holding you accountable for what you will tell them. Somebody that you can call at any time and be available for you, and due to an emergency or whatever, but you will feel free to call this person in a confident that you can tell anything and that will be protecting the information you're giving, right? Because it's been an honest and a loyal friendship. That's a very important thing for me.
I also think, I just thought about it, forgiveness, being forgiving, because sometimes without really wanting, you may say something that upsets your friends or hurts your friends. And really, it's not worth it to keep it like a long, dispute or being apart for a long time. It's important to be forgiving sometimes.
And that's something I left out. I think having a healthy, good relationship doesn't mean it's always good, right? Some level of conflict is normal in relationships that have meaning because, it's just part of life. And it's also important to keep your own sense of self in those relationships. And a good relationship allows you to do that, right? You have your own opinions, your own thoughts on things. And sometimes that can cause a riff or someone to get upset, but the thing is to be able to come back and discuss that and then come back to the same page of like, we're entitled to different opinions, but we still value each other, and our relationship, our friendship. And so that's something, good reminder that we want people to take away also. But I am curious what other people think as they've moved through these different decades in their life, what things have changed in their friendships, what have been the key values that have been important to them throughout, or maybe that developed as they got older, and what tips do they give to people to continue to strengthen the relationships they have, or maybe even create new connections as they get older, apart from the ones that we mentioned. If people like this, I hope they like and subscribe because we have more themes coming up around this process of aging and ways to do it in healthy ways and ways that support our functioning as we move forward in life. But let's quickly introduce ourselves. Mom.
Anna.
My tia.
Laura.
I'm Joanna, and we want to remind everyone, whether it's good, bad, or funny,
Leave it
Live it
up.
up.